Welcome to the MCI Solutions Exciting Learning Panel. I'm Jenna Myerson. I am the CEO of MCI. And before I introduce our esteemed panel, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, we have a very small audience in the room. Thank you guys for coming. And as well, we've got about 250 people online. So thank you all for dialing in. I know some of you have dialed in from Perth and from across the country. And I know it's different time zones and we really appreciate it. First things first, before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick acknowledgement to country. So MCI acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to their elders past, present and emerging. We are broadcasting live from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and so please, if you want to put into Q&A or into the comments where you are based and where you are listening from, that would be fantastic. Just a quick note on the Q&A. You'll notice that if you make the screen a lot bigger, so you select the button, which I think is a little square that makes your screen full screen, you have to exit out of that to type into Q&A. We encourage you to please, this is why they are here, this is why they have prepped for today, to ask as many questions as you can. The more questions you ask, the more I can ask them and the more interactive this can be. So please don't be shy, type into the Q&A or send us through to the MCI email address if you have some questions. I'd be happy to ask them. But before we get started, let me quickly introduce you to our panel. I don't want to waste any more time. You're here to listen to them and not to me. So first of all, we have Yvette Ryan. Let me pop over on this side. Yvette, give us a wave. Thank you. So Yvette is the Leadership Learning Lead at CSIRO, and she has some fantastic insights from how they've adapted during this period of hybrid working. We have Colin Sargent, who is the Senior Manager for Leadership and Learning at QBE. Give us a wave, Colin. Thank you. We've got Mareki White, Training Strategy and Governance Manager for Essential Energy. Give us a wave. Thank you. And of course, Denise, who is the founder of MCI, who is usually the one talking at the MCI events, but she's going to be the one drilling and giving these guys a bit of a run for their money today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Denise. And please, as I said, continue to post in Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. I know they want to answer your questions. And thank you for joining us today.
So welcome everyone, and a very special welcome to our panelists. I feel, I must say, a little bit daunted in the face of so many people who've really been at the coalface of what's been happening in the world over the past 2 years, and have so much to look forward to into the future as well. So I'm going to get right into it and start off, I think, with you, Mareki, if that's okay. And just thinking about, what you would say some of the key challenges are as we've moved from the BC times before COVID into the AD times after disease. What do you think some of the key challenges have been organizationally from a learning and development perspective?
Very clever. Look, BC-wise, didn't COVID bring some amazing challenges and opportunities for us? I mean, we've all felt through that learning's become all of a sudden coveted, perhaps more meaningful to the organisations we work for than it may have been.
Yes.
This up.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly, I tend to agree. I don't know, Colin, how you feel about that. Do you see those challenges emerging maybe as opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, the challenges. They turn into opportunities for the individuals and our employees. Getting into hybrid working, it's changed the way that we work, I think, forever, which in many ways I think is a good thing. But for us as learning professionals, it presents a bit of a challenge. I think I'm interested to hear from the others as to how we're trying to solve for that. And if anyone's got the kind of golden ticket, then please let us know.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's about how do we make things work for our employees, for ourselves, and deliver on our objectives in a very different world.
It is. It certainly is. I don't know, Yvette, as well for you, how do you see these as challenges or opportunities, a bit of both?
I think for us there has really been a shift in how people consider learning happening. So I think, a lot of people thought learning happened in a classroom environment. Sometimes that might be through a webinar or WebEx, but now people are thinking about it in a different context. And I think it's exciting that people are looking at learning as a more broad opportunity and experience than just that 10% of the 70-20-10 model.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, Mary, from your perspective, what do you think you have figured out, and what do you think still needs to be improved or changed or developed further?
Look, I think, so go back to 2020, right, and all of a sudden everything is either forced to stop or go online, which is a huge challenge, huge opportunity, as we said. I think for us, it's been about then, as we return back to a way of working that is some of the organisation working from home or hybrid, the rest having returned to, for us, a field-based role, which it's not just COVID for us. We've had COVID and then bushfires and then floods, and our network is out there in the elements with all of this, and our team's working with that. So for us, it's been about finding that balance of, as you come back into the world, it will never be as normal again as it was, but as you come back into that, what's the right balance of virtual delivery and not? You know, we kind of stopped everything for a little while, and then had to move some of our more regulatory and technical training, which for us is 50% of our bread and butter. We had to figure out what we could do online then. And as you snap back, it becomes not just what could you do online, but what should you, and where's the right balance in terms of the blend. We got some amazing engagement with our leadership programs in that time. We had just started planning a frontline leadership program, so it meant we were able to reach hundreds and hundreds of leaders at the front line that we might never have reached in person, or it might have taken us years to get through them. All of a sudden we have an opportunity to stand up these short hits of training with them and connect leaders from depots across the entire state with leaders in support functions who are going through really similar things, and perhaps they'd never connected. So there's that huge opportunity and that huge benefit we heard about connecting with each other using virtual means now, but I feel like we're all getting a little bit tired, and that perhaps virtual and short hits is not meeting our customer need anymore. So as we go back to, well, what do you select for in-person training? You know, where do you add the most value versus use the technology you've got for that blend? That's our biggest challenge now, is in finding the right balance.
Yeah, and you know how are you going to determine that?
Oh,
you know
look.
The
customer.
We'll crowdsource that.
Yeah. No, we honestly need to listen to our customer. I think our organisation's great at listening to its customers, but internally it's about us understanding. I mean, the organisation now has this. We've had a real sense of compression in terms of the works program and what we need to get through all these kind of natural disasters that the universe keeps throwing at us. Listening to our customer in terms of what actually matters to them, and turning products like the MCI Live Virtual Classroom, little plug for our sponsor today. So that's a product that's gone really well for our support functions, our engineering functions, but our field, you know, half our organisation who are out there doing a day job in the elements have found it harder to engage with. So the challenge now is, how do we find ways to make the products we've got useful to that audience and to meet a need, but you can't do that without listening to them.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for all those comments. I think I see people in the audience writing quite a few things down there, because I think you touched on a lot of what others are experiencing as well. Colin, for you, how would you say you navigated through these changes, I mean, particularly from a learning and development perspective?
So I think in some respects we were a little lucky as we went into COVID, so quite geographically dispersed. So we look after Australia, Pacific, so we've got the Pacific Islands, New Zealand, and a load of locations across Australia. So about 4 years ago we'd started a piece of work that we called Learning for All, which was really making learning available to everyone. We had a challenge that essentially we were doing face-to-face in Sydney, and people didn't have budget to fly in and do these sorts of things. So we were trying to solve for that, and we'd had it up and running maybe 12 months when the lockdown started. So, you know, if you remember back, 2020 was the year of the pivot. So I'll talk about the pivots, and we just changed our tack, and we moved away from some of the BAU, bread and butter sort of learning, and we started looking at what did our people really need at that time. So we had wellbeing initiatives, we had a real focus on resilience that we pushed through, but we also partnered with some of the sports teams that we sponsor. So we were doing things like exercise classes with the Swans, the Swifts were doing pieces, we had cook-alongs and things like that, and I think it's something that I'll talk about in a little while, but I'll take any of that as learning, because from my perspective, if people are happy and people are doing enjoying their work, which was really challenging when we're all at home, then you get the best out of people, and I think that starts to create that environment. So we were quite fortuitous, I think, that we had the platform in order to deliver that. I think the challenge for us now is how do we keep evolving that and keep our foot down.
Yeah, without question. And thank you for those comments. I think, again, very valid. And for you, Rach, I mean, where do you see, how do you think that you manage the change to different times? If in hindsight, would you have done anything differently?
So I think for us, we really approach things with a bit of an experimental mindset. I remember actually being a participant in one of our previous leadership curriculums when the sort of order to work from home started and those sorts of things, and my colleagues in the learning team sort of scrambling to move things online because it was previously a sort of 3-day residential gig, and they did an amazing job in what was just a period of having to react and cope and deal with it, and also taking into account that people who perhaps didn't work at home before were thrust into this new working environment, trying to juggle challenges of children being homeschooled or certain daycares only allowing essential workers, and everyone was in this sort of period of uncertainty. And we experimented, we did what we could. We tried that a few times with our previous curriculum, and then we saw that there was this real opportunity for us to take what we'd learnt from those online experiments and really think about how we can use that to influence what we did next in leadership development. And that included, like you were saying, listening to our people. So we used a whole range of data sources, including the state-based leader check-ins we were having, just to see how our leaders were coping and how their people were coping with these, massive shutdowns and lockdowns. We have a lot of staff in Victoria and Sydney, and so, we know that there were big lockdowns in those areas. And so for us, there was really an opportunity for us to listen to those, as well as culture survey and engagement survey data, and think, well, what are the real key challenges our people are trying to face? And so we use that as our basis for trying to adapt to what came next. So
yeah. So compared to what the program, this leadership program, looked like previously, what is it emerging to start to look like now?
Yeah, sure. So we actually paused all of our previous leadership curriculum once we'd sort of been through that first sort of 8 months or so of the pandemic. And as I say, we took that time to regroup, to listen, and to think of a new way to approach how we develop our leaders. So there were a few things that we wanted to achieve out of that new approach. One was we wanted to get scale. Our leadership curriculum before was amazing, and I was fortunate enough to participate in a number of those offerings. But the challenge was budgets, travel, all those things that meant that actually many people didn't get the opportunity to participate. So it's hard to create a groundswell with changing leadership behaviours through development. So we wanted to get scale. We wanted to make it inclusive in the way people could access it. So we moved things to a virtual environment. We did have one course previously that was virtual, but it did have a face-to-face component as well. We moved this entirely to virtual. We tried to make it short, sharp sessions that meant leaders could fit it into their schedule, and the practice component of the program was really designed for them to be able to practice in their roles on real stuff. We didn't want to give them a case study to work through or a project to work through. We really wanted to think about how they could apply this stuff, as they walked out of the virtual meeting room in their real jobs, because our leaders don't have time to do extra stuff. They tell us that loud and clear every day of the week, and it's fair, and I understand. And so we really wanted to be conscious of that. So there's some of the approaches we did. We were really fortunate that we partnered with an amazing provider to help develop that program as well. So we partnered with Ben Delta, and they've been amazing in supporting this kind of new vision. And our key ambition with it is to develop that world-class leadership practice within our organisation. And I really want to emphasise that word practice, and that's the kind of mindset we're really trying to instill in our leaders.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Sounds like I could go on this myself as well. And Mary, for you,
Can I ask a question?
Yes, with pleasure.
Where did you start? Did you take that hiatus for 8 months and then start again with all levels of leadership, or did you deliberately start at the top end of town? Or
yes, so our new program actually targets all levels of leadership, and they're a mixed cohort, which was a big experiment for us because previously we had very hierarchical kind of programs. So that's been really interesting, and we're getting really positive feedback about how that sort of peer learning that's happening, and really positive feedback and surprise of the connection, the psych safety, and also the networks that people have been able to build in a virtual environment. Because I think we all have some skepticism about how well can you actually, kind of get to know someone when you only see them in 2D on a screen and you're only meeting them in short bursts rather than that kind of immersive traditional leadership experience, which I think many of us are familiar with. And people at the end of the program have commented on, we've had comments like, there was no point in doing the program where I thought I would miss a session because they were so valuable. And these are senior leaders as well saying things like that. We had people saying that their peer connections, that they made connections with people they would never have spoken to otherwise, but that connection has been so valuable to their leadership practice, and also just to getting to know more about the organisation and understanding more about our organisation, because CSIRO is quite complex. We're big, we're spread out all over the place. I think everybody on here is nodding it. Yeah, so, it's really given them appreciations as well of what other people are having to, do across the organisation.
Lovely, thank you, and thank you for the question. So, Mary, for you as well, where do you see things moving now? What's emerging from what you've learned, what you've experienced? What's up front?
Oh, look, I guess for us, so in our context, we're in a highly regulated environment, safety critical environment. So we've kind of got two portions of learning and development, and one is around that kind of human skill, leadership skill piece, and a lot of similarities with your journey, I think. We actually said early on with our providers, we're aiming here for connection over content. That is it. And in a virtual space, the more content you try and cram in, the less connection you'll get. So slow down, create some space. But the other half for us is around this, the energy industry is in the news at the moment, right? There's a whole lot of activity. We're on the way to net zero. That brings with it huge challenges for us, a lot of investment, public and private, going on in the industry. So we have an incredible amount of work to get through, and a lot of that requires specific technical skills. And so for us, the other half of the equation is to look at, what are the future skills the business will need? We're on this incredible growth trajectory at the moment, which is awesome. We have more of the right conversations and support and energy and people in our team now than we ever have before. But we've got this growth phase happening in an age of scarcity. It's hard to get the right bums on seats, even in L&D. You look then at us being a really niche organisation. Transgrid would be the same, right? What do future skills look like for us in terms of that support for the future network? That's what we keep challenging ourselves on. So we've got a program in place at the moment to look at some of the things we know are coming down the track, and they're really concrete, things like standalone power systems. But it's how do we get fit for the stuff that's just emerging out of the future and we know we need to be ready for as a team? How do we open our mindset so that we're ready to tackle that, when it turns up? So we have this cool little practice in the management team called a think tank, which is just us kind of practicing our creativity and problem-solving skills and arguing it with each other in a constructive way, you know. But the latest challenge from our leader, which has been really constructive, is, well, we've always done what we always did with technical skills. How do you rethink that? How could we take into our programs a mechanic or an auto electrician or a refrigeration and air conditioning type person? How could we possibly make use of all these other markets to bring people into our little niche and attract them and keep them? So it's kind of forcing us to think differently, which is great for the mindset, yeah. But yeah, so future skills is one of our core challenges.
The big issues, which obviously isn't solved immediately, but hopefully that think tank is thinking.
And it's complex. It's a wicked problem to solve. So you'll never quite define it or solve it. You can only try different things to make it slightly better or worse.
And through that experimentation.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Colin, over to you. Give us a rundown on what happened, what's going to happen.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of similarities with what's already been spoken about. I might just touch on the future skills. We've just gone through some organisational transformation that, on the face of it, looks like a little bit of realigning of teams, but there's a fundamental change to the way that we're trying to work. We're moving to a more agile way of working. We've got different profit and loss centres that are being stood up, and we're really looking at what those future skills that we need across the workforce. And I think one of the challenges that we face is around people view transformation as IT work or as project work, and we're pushing quite hard at the moment to say, well, what's the people impact of this? How do we make sure that people are ready to adopt the change? And I'm a huge advocate for trying to share the same information at every level of the organisation. So I think historically we've looked at big leadership programs for our top 80 people. Well, there's 3,500 of us. So what are we doing to make the 3,500 ready for what the top 80 are starting to drive as an agenda? And I think that's the journey that I see us on at the moment, is what are we doing with the exec teams? What are we doing with their leadership teams? And how do we bring those skills to life and enable the broader population to be ready for the changes that we know are going to come? And how do we sell the what's in it for them as well, without alarming people? The roles are going to change. Automation's coming in, AI's there, so it's going to change the way that people work. And whilst I don't believe it's going to lead to any cuts or anything like that, it's going to change the way that people are doing their jobs, and how do we help people get ready for that whilst they're also caught in the capacity challenges that we hear at the moment. So similar to what a vet says, we hear time and time again, I don't have time to come on a course. If it's more than 60 minutes long, you're not going to get people committing to it, or you get high dropout rates. So we're really sort of looking at now, how do we get people information just in time and the information that they need? And I think for me, if that's 3 bullet points on a piece of paper that they can pull out every so often and remind themselves, that's good enough. We don't need to create huge programmatic pieces let's give people the right information and the right tools at the right time, and I think that's the challenge, is helping them to recognise what those tools might be.
And I mean, that to me is quite a different view of what constitutes learning. It's a far broader, 3 bullet points compared to a full day of training is quite a difference.
Yeah, I think I get told off for this. I've been in HR for sort of 17 years, but I grew up in the insurance industry as a claims officer, so I've kind of come through that technical training. So I often refer to myself as somebody who's not sort of a classic L&D person, although the vast majority of my career has been L&D. And I think with that comes a personal aversion to some of the, let's call it the older programmatic ways of doing things, the sitting down to define learning objectives and then an assessment at the end. It never made sense to me, because where's the consequence of failure? So there's only value in an assessment if you're going to have a consequence or a reward for succeeding or failing. And so I've always viewed it in that way. And I think that as we've moved into more of a org development sort of organisation, unbeknownst to me, that's probably the mindset that I've had for the last 15 years, is this is just about helping people to do their jobs better. That's all it is. And we banner it under L&D or leadership, or it's just how do we help people to do their jobs more effectively, more efficiently, better for them, more enjoyable for them, and ultimately that should look after the bottom line of the company.
Yeah, and very valid points. I don't know if you want to comment on any of those. I see you nodding.
Seriously, I feel like I might end up with whiplash. I'm so in agreement with you. But it's, one of the things that we really thought about as well was with the leadership program, we often get them to do some sort of project and presentation at the end. And, similarly, it wasn't as assessment as such, but it was giving them a false to practice. And this time we got them to think about, what do you want your leadership legacy to be? How do you want people to remember you as a leader? And if you want them to remember you that way, how do you have to show up to create that legacy? And so for us, it was actually just giving them kind of the banner under which to conduct that reflection to really help them sort of put the content that they were coming across into practice. And the other thing for me, I think, is, and it sort of goes to that future of some of the things we're talking about in our team, is how can we actually take almost learning into the team environment? How can we take it from, this idea of a program or an e-learning or, whatever the case might be, into something that's actually a discussion amongst the team so that everyone ends up on the same page about expectations or how we want to behave, or how do we actually, live our values, or how do we meet our privacy requirements, or whatever the case might be. And every team is a little bit different. So, I think there's a real opportunity for us to start to switch gears. And sometimes we have to change our language. So sometimes we have to talk about it in a way that people don't think learning in the traditional sense. I think we have to have a bit of a language shift in our profession on how we talk about this stuff, because there is a bit of a assumption of what that looks like, and we might in our minds see it as much more broad than a program. But if we use the language of learning and that sort of stuff, we instantly kind of narrow our stakeholders and our people's kind of view of what they're doing.
Just to expand on that a little bit, it's a similar sort of environment. We're looking at what do we do in teams, and part of the conversation is reminding leaders of the role of a leader, and I think we've lost sight of that over the last few years, particularly during COVID. That shifted the focus back on you're there as a whole leader, you've got the whole employee, and you're there for them all the time. So how do we help leaders to go back to those real fundamentals of what their role is in those teams? And again, this is where the bullet points on people. Here's some questions to chat to your team about, and that can be good enough. Let's get the conversation happening, and if we can just steer that narrative a little bit, then that in my mind leads us to change.
And trust that they'll get it right, and if they don't, it's a learning for them. You don't have to corporate the hell out of everything.
Yep.
100%.
Yes. Very, very good points. Thank you. I know that we've got a question from quite a few questions. Okay.
So the first question, and thank you to the audience for sending these through, is has the way you spent your budget changed to reflect the different approaches, or is it still being spent the same way? So that's the first question. I've got about 5, so keep going.
Well, let's just go down the line.
I'll go first. Budget questions. I think it has changed. I think in terms of, I've been in the role that I'm in for the last sort of 12, 18 months or so, and when we look at it, like I said, we were spending a lot of our money at the top of house, and we're trying to democratise that significantly now, and recognising that if we can get to more people, then we can drive more change. So I think in that sense, we've changed the way that we're spending money. And I think we're trying to be more creative and looking at more sort of innovative solutions. So as technology is advancing, how do we bring interesting things back into the learning world? And for me, again, it sounds sort of simplistic, but if you can make learning memorable, then that's half your battle. And I think that we've got technology at our fingertips now that people haven't seen. We might see it, we might see demos of it, but an organisation who are used to doing something quite different if they're out in the field, or, if we take the simulations, or if we take some of the virtual solutions that are out there and available that we can invest some money in, then I think you get people excited about learning again. And for me as a practitioner, that's exciting for me as well.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same. We're spending far more at the middle or frontline end of the organisation now than perhaps we have before. We also added, so in terms of the teams we've had, we added our corporate learning and development function on during COVID. Until then, we were mostly a technical training function because of that strong kind of regulatory focus. So is the budget different? Yes, because that whole team is new for us and has formed during the COVID period,
Okay.
I think
Okay.
it's similar. I think it's where we're investing our money when it comes to learning. So whether we're investing things that people can access on that as needs basis through self-directed learning, or whether it is things like MCI's subscription model that is nice and short and sharp, and those sorts of things, as well as, stuff that we can do more at scale. So it's how we're investing the money as opposed to how much, perhaps.
And we're getting some cool kit. Like, we are starting to work more on virtual reality as a means of providing a safe environment for some of our most high-risk activities. We're building simulators for some of our network functions, like switching trailers and simulators. So the fact that we've got money to spend on that kind of thing is awesome, because it's setting us up for the future. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone's like, where do I get virtual reality budget? So the next question somebody asked is, what is the panel's opinion on the view by some that virtual learning is still seen as next best or a contingency to face-to-face, and advice on elevating its value within the business?
I can ask some of our participants who I think came into our leadership program with that view that, oh, well, there's nothing else on offer at the moment, so I guess I'll do this, and walked out saying, wow, that fit well into my work schedule. It gave me the content I needed when I needed it, and also I didn't have to feel like I had extra things to do, but I built connection, I built networks, I felt psychological safety that perhaps I hadn't felt in other programs I'd done. So, we've had a case with our program where people have really sort of changed their tune about that. We're in an organisation, though, where we're not saying no to face-to-face development either. There's still a time and a place for that, 100%. And, we're still going to be looking at where we bring that in and how we approach that. But, for somewhere where you want to get scale, you want to be able to start creating the ripple effect within leaders, particularly around behaviours and how they're showing up. I would say that we've really been able to do that with the programs that we've done.
Agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. Look, it's about knowing which horse for the course.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing we've managed to do, if you think about digital in terms of, we also have a suite of compliance products that were built, it feels like back in the 90s some days. And you write the rule book and you put a question on the end, and it's now your fault if you get it wrong, not ours. We've done a really good job over the years of telling our people that is e-learning. E-communication, e-questions at the end, that's e-learning, right? We're doing it right. So we've also got this battle, I guess, internally with ourselves in going, everything that we do, even if it's a compliance product, whether that's our regulatory training days with the humans, whether that's the online compliance suite, how do we make it useful so you're not wasting people's time and make it valuable?
It's so true, because we have, similar government, lots of compliance training that we have to deliver. And one of my colleagues in our Learning Academy team took a new approach to our privacy training. Now, being a government organisation, we have really strict requirements around privacy, and when we get it wrong, we get in trouble. And we actually used a case where we didn't get it right to deliver the training. So it's a series of videos, and it runs through the case, and it's a bit of a, we have a great privacy lawyer that actually delivered the videos. She's really engaging. It was only video. There was no quiz at the end, and we got so many comments on it. But the proof in the pudding was we actually had a significant increase in people also requesting privacy threshold assessments to see what their requirements were. So we did this compulsory training, but what it did was, we've done e-learning in privacy for years. That never sent up the privacy threshold requests. All of a sudden people were like, wow, actually I need to take something away from this, and maybe I need to think about that project I'm doing or that research that I'm doing and what sort of assessment needs to be done. So, just taking a different tact in how we engaged people, and it goes back to your 3 bullet points. It wasn't quite 3 bullet points, but it definitely was a bit more of a story approach, which really resonated for people.
Fabulous. Colin,
I largely agree with everything there. I think that in the question it sort of talked about the view of others about this. I think that when we first started delivering virtually, we made the mistake of just trying to turn face-to-face content into virtually delivered content, and that was partly start of COVID was we turned a leadership program into a virtual one in 2 weeks or something like that. So there's only so much you can do, but I think that as time's gone on, we've learned to just keep it really simple, short and sharp, and that seems to be much more effective. So, but otherwise, just completely agree with what else has been said.
And advice for the person who asked the question as well, in terms of, well, how do you pitch this to the wider business to say, yes, we are maybe having to remain virtual for whatever reason, and no, it's not second best?
I think we have had lots of conversations. So where people sort of ask us a question, for us it was lots of people asking about our past curriculum and wanting to know when that was coming back, and me then picking up the phone, and yes, it was time consuming, but picking up the phone and having the conversation to explain the type of experience they were going to have in the new program. We've now had 260 participants complete that program. So we actually have a pool of people that we've drawn on to put together a little video that is a bit of a promo video for the program that actually shares the experience. So it takes some of that out. And so I think you kind of need the voice of the people that have experienced it, because, it's like any change process. There's that process of giving people the knowledge and things, but we really, sometimes desire will only come from, their friend that sits or colleague that sits next to them that they really trust. So,
absolutely. Any advice? Because it seems as though at QB they snapped onto this a lot faster.
I think we did. We did start it a couple of years really before COVID hit, which I think, like I said earlier, was quite advantageous for us. But I think that it has been grabbed hold of, and interestingly for us now, we did experiment earlier this year with using some face-to-face training as a bit of a return to office pull, and it bombed. It was terrible. Like 25, 30 people registered out in Parramatta. We woke up, it's raining, and 4 people arrived, and you go, okay. So, but in contrast to that, the virtual versions of it, we had 60, 70 people signing up. We had wait lists there. So we're kind of testing the water with what is going to be the pull, when is the right time to try and do the face-to-face again and get that hybrid piece right. And I think for us it comes back to what's in it for me, why am I coming along to this, how am I going to benefit from straight afterwards, and how are you going to do this in shorter than my lunch break. And if you can get to that, then people are engaging with it. In terms of our population, we see about half of our audience, so about 1,500 people each year coming along to something. This is all voluntary, online, the webinar stuff, so it's pretty good. How do we get to the other 50% is what we're working on next year. But I think that when you've got that sort of buy-in, and it comes back to what you said, people are coming along, they're enjoying it, they're engaging with it, they know what to expect. And I think it just takes a bit of time to get people there. If I'm honest, you've got to keep at it and keep pushing it, and people will get on board.
Anything to add to that?
The other 50% is our challenge too.
Yeah.
I've got a question for.
Yes, please.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Look, we talked coming in about the rogues who are not the rogues, right? The parts of the organisation that are doing their own thing in terms of learning, or the things that aren't coined learning but are learning anyway. I think that's part of our kind of future thought process, right? Is how do we add value to that, the disconnected or the decentralised learning that happens, and what's the role L&D plays in kind of supporting and enabling and adding value to that? Have you had experience with that?
Quite happy to share where we're at with it. I think we've probably getting towards something that I think has got some legs in terms of working quite effectively. And we've talked, so we're a global organisation, so I work with my counterparts in Europe, North America and group here. So when you look at it like that, there's 15, 16,000 of us geographically dispersed, and we're all doing the same thing. So there's a me in Europe who's trying to do leadership and learning, and fundamentally it's broadly the same, right? And so we've started talking about the different types of initiatives. We've got 4 categories. One is what's just delivered by the enterprise. The second is what's an initiative coming out of a division or an area that actually we should all just get on board with. The third is what's the division doing that actually we should just pick up and roll out, so no collaboration, but we're just going to take it. And the fourth is that's actually bespoke. And what we're looking at doing is bringing that sort of model in with these the rogue teams, who some of our rogue teams, one of the teams that I'm thinking of is 3 times the size of my team. So how can I keep up in terms of content and development? I can't, but can I lift and leverage the great work that they're doing and make that applicable across the organisation? Yes, and that's where I see my role as a connector, a collaborator, pushing things down the line into those spaces, helping them deliver something that's not so niche for their business unit that it becomes unapplicable elsewhere. And I think when we start working in that way and working as a collective rather than I think competing with one another, which has probably been the case in the past, I think we get some really good results.
Okay, I know that there's another
maybe
question.
a bit of a rapid fire because there's quite a lot of questions coming through, which is fantastic. Thank you. So when moving towards a hybrid working and learning environment, have you found a modular training approach to be effective for employees across the board or not?
I think in the leadership space, we found it to be effective. So, as I said, prior to that, we converted, and similar, I think you said the similar thing, Colin, that, converted our previous programs, which were face-to-face, into an online because we were reacting to the situation and we were experimenting, doing the best we could with the cards we were dealt. But we did find for people that, being on a video call for all day for 3 days in a row or whatever the case might have been, even though you built in extra breaks and all that sort of stuff, it wasn't sustainable to try and run it that way. And for us, trying to separate things out into modules, giving them actual practical time in between has definitely been a positive change for us. Yep.
Oh, look, I think you've got to learn from that. Like I look back at what we used to do as big intensives of days and days, and you walk out with the highlight, the low light, and the thing at the end anyway.
And how was lunch?
And how was like, oh God, don't do savoury muffins, So I actually question whether it's made us rethink the way we do that anyway. Just because you have people in person, you felt like you had to cram them full of stuff, and it wasn't the most effective way anyway. Yeah. So it's kind of given us license to shorten and sharpen.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
I'll start with Colin on this one. Are you experiencing the employees leave me alone sentiment versus the employers everyone upskill for future push? And if so, how are you dealing with it?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think for me that's something that I see as one of our biggest challenges next year. It is around how do we know that we need to change, and we also know that our people are crying out for support capacity. It was interesting you talked about bushfires, floods, and a pandemic. We're an insurance company, so we're dealing with bushfires, floods, and a pandemic. And so people are flat out and they're tired out, and we also know that we need to shift the dial. So we're absolutely facing it. I think for me, this comes back to the intent and to the link back. I see a need for us to really drive the change through our leadership and the behaviour of our senior leaders in terms of if we want to drive this sort of capability change, we need to be talking about it at the very senior levels, but we also need to be cognizant of capacity and make some hard decisions, I think, next year about, are we serious about capability uplift, or are we going to just fall back on we don't have time to do this? Because I think we're in a position as professionals to influence that and to be the voice of the business. And it's something I've always enjoyed, is representing the person who is on the phones in a call centre who would love to do this stuff, but then they get penalised because they haven't taken enough calls. So how do we stand up for them at those senior levels? I know it doesn't really answer the question. Absolutely, we're facing it. How do we solve it? I'm not sure yet. Yeah.
Grace.
And being really clear on what matters, right? Like if it's truly a skill for the future and you can demonstrate that, then you have to find the time with your customer to build it. If it's just something that someone thinks is nice to, or an add-on, or everyone should know this because I know it, it kind of forces you to get crisp on the what's in it for me.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Okay.
Thank you. So for all of you, just a quick answer to this one. What have you found the max duration for e-learning training to keep employees engaged? And has training been split in two to cater for attention span changes?
Not just splitting two. Splitting like this bit, blend it completely, yeah. Duration of e-learning as in self-paced e-learning versus synchronous e-learning is different too, I think. Yeah. Oh, asynchronous. Don't give us more than 7 or 8 minutes. A video is 2, right? Do we live by that? No. But I mean,
still
yeah.
click along, yes. But I think the trend, I don't know if you're noticing, the trend is definitely to shorter and sharper.
Well, and for us, it's actually just that privacy example that I gave.
Yes.
It's not 7 or 8 minutes, it's longer. But
How long was that?
changing the, I don't know, I'd have to go and actually
20,
look.
30,
But
yeah.
But
probably
it's
about
a
20,
story.
but it was differently shared with our people.
Okay.
So it was shared as a story. It really sort of got you engaged. We had an engaging person delivering it. So I think, where we can't always keep to the 7 or 8 minutes, because I tend to agree, short and sharp's nice, making sure that the content that you're delivering and the manner in which it's being delivered is really important.
And sorry, that's me wearing my e-compliance hat, not my e-true learning hat. Yep.
The perfect segue to the next question. What's your view on competency over compliance? That's for all three.
What do you say to that one?
It comes with the caveat that I no longer look after any of our compliance training, which is fantastic. I'm all for competency. I think that the challenge that I always put back to the SMEs when we needed compliance training is, you go through and at the end it says, click here to say that you've read the policy or something, and it comes back, as somebody said earlier, it's now on you because you've said that you read it, and actually it doesn't tell you anything. So for me, how do we make sure that people really understand this and understand the intent of it? They don't need to parrot the regulation or the law or the policy. They need to understand what it is we're really asking them to do. So I think in that sort of shift, it's all about the competency rather than compliance, although recognising we have to be compliant as well.
Yeah, I'd almost also add a layer that, the competency in being able to comply, it actually comes from the conversations that we have after we do those sorts of training, right? So, we have annual compliance training of different things, privacy, code of conduct, like the list goes on. Feels as long as my arm. New starters do about 20 when they start, whatever the case might be. But, if nobody's talking to them about it in the context of their own role or the team they're working in or the site they're working on or any of those things, like it's not worth anything, right? Because then they can't contextualise it to where they are. And, particularly if we think about new starters, they're not familiar with the organisation and all its quirks. And so if we're not talking to a new starter about, so you did your code of conduct training, how do you think that would apply in your role, et cetera, how are they supposed to work that out themselves in an organisation like ours where we've got things like intellectual property and, all sorts of sort of, standards we have to meet from a publishing and research perspective and all those things. So, yeah.
It's for us, there's also an element of, why do you do compliance activities? It's for confidence, not just for tick a box, and we've got some activities that we do in field with real life people, human to human, around verification of competence to prove people have the skills and knowledge to work on our network or to do high risk work. And that for us is an activity that gives us confidence. And we do it, we actually do it every year through our regulatory program, but we're looking to extend that across a different class of activities in the next year. The whole point of that, we could use that as a purely compliance activity. We've got people out there with humans, we're investing time, money, taking them off the tools to do it. We could either do that as a straight up assessment to prove you can do, or we could use that opportunity that we've got with them in a time of scarcity and I don't have time to actually instill some learning, to work on people's kind of learning capacity and give them something as well as ask them to demonstrate something. Yeah. And so that's our challenge this next year is how do we take every opportunity and make it more about learning than just compliance.
Fantastic. Great ideas, I think, that you've shared there as well. Let's hear another one.
Quite a few more questions. Well, I'll ask one more and then I'll open it up to our internal audience if anyone wants to bravely raise their hands next. So this question is about measuring ROI. So hot topic. So how are you measuring the impact of corporate or leadership learning, the actual change or return on investment back in the workplace, not just the post-course happy sheets, which we all love?
We did something pretty different with our Spark program. We decided we were going to measure over the period of people participating in the program and also a set period of time after they completed to see whether they had maintained and retained the practices that they'd implemented. So that has been a really different way for us. There's a lot more questions that our participants are having to answer. The questions are framed in a reflective way, so we're hopeful that the leaders use it as an opportunity to reflect on their leadership practice. But it's also giving us data on how people are, what people are getting out of the program from a learning outcomes perspective, and our learning outcomes are aligned to our leadership capability framework. But also, are they actually keeping it up? Because I think many of us have been on programs where we sort of walk out of the room at the end of the program and go, that was amazing. And then we get back to work and we've got like back-to-back meetings and, the kids have to be picked up from school or, the parents need to go to an appointment or whatever, and life and work just gets in the way. So what we're seeing in that data is a upward trend against the majority of our learning outcomes. The ones that people sort of fluctuate more on are the ones about how often I reflect. That tends to fluctuate depending on what's going on, and you can almost align it with certain parts of our organisational cycle. But generally an upward tick on how people are going against the learning objectives. Our key challenge with it is getting enough responses. As I said, it's a longer survey, it's happening more frequently. They're not used to that as participants, and so trying to share with them the value of them contributing to that is still part of our challenge.
Colin, Mary.
Sounds like a longitudinal study for a bunch of scientists.
Yeah,
is that what you're about?
CSIRO, we did have the joke at the start that, you never know, maybe one day we could use this data for a paper.
It's not. I think measurement of learning is an age-old challenge.
Yeah.
What we're sort of looking at doing, and it sounds similar. We've got a bit of survey fatigue. All through COVID, we were asking surveys, well-being questions pretty frequently, weekly or fortnightly for a good year or year and a half. But what we have shifted to is a quarterly pulse survey as an organisation, and we've got a bit more input into the questions that we're asking in there. So we're just starting to sort of put the line in the sand in terms of sentiment and anecdote. I think it is a really good indicator. So we've just done a load of work around careers, and we prefaced the work with a question around how where do you see your career at QBE in the next 1 to 3 years, or do you see opportunities? And that gave us a line in the sand. We then ran and we saw a 3% uptick, which in the scheme of the surveys is quite good. And so we're starting to get more intentional with the questions that we're asking and the timing of those questions. I think that we need to get into the next layer though, and how do you actually evidence that it was the work that me and my team did versus leaders doing their job in the correct way. It's difficult.
It's quite a challenge, I know.
I don't know that I can add anything of value to that.
No. Okay.
Anyone in the audience in person want to ask a question? Don't be shy. Oh, please, Alistair. A hand so everyone online can hear you.
Thanks. For a long time, L&D had to kind of fight for its place at the table and for relevance. And I think now that we've seen it increase and become more aware as a viable part of business success overall, has that created any new challenges with that increased expectation now, almost a victim of success in a way, that you've had to respond to?
Setting the bar high.
I don't think it's created challenges for us, except for perhaps capacity, because we get drawn into more conversations than perhaps we were having before. But for us, it's been a real opportunity to influence. We talked about those different teams that roll out learning, and for us, it's often compliance-style learning that comes from other parts of the business. We're now getting much more opportunity to influence how that looks, because at the end of the day, our people don't say, oh, that was a governance learning program. They just see it as a learning program and they think it comes from our team. So now we can influence how that shows up, how it is aligned to the rest of the learning that we're delivering, as an organisation, and also influence, I guess, how they deliver it, so that hopefully it's actually going to be more impactful for what they're trying to achieve from that learning. So,
great question. Thank you. Anything else to add on to that one? No.
Almost the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Others in the audience here, or else I've got questions from online. Don't be shy. Yes. Marie-Claire.
Hi. So we're all learning professionals. What's the latest learning you've done?
Thank you.
That's right.
I went to a fantastic course 2 weeks ago, our internal. So we talked about that coming back into the office, and often we heard from our employees that one of the only reasons they'd come in from home with their Ugg boots on was for learning. And so we knew that it was time to start doing that for our leadership program. So I went to a connected leadership, which when you think about the theme that we're all looking at the moment, it's connecting with each other, with yourself, for us with our purpose as an organisation. We've been siloed and disconnected for so long that just the chance to connect with my peers again was amazing. Loved it. Yep.
I'll give you two answers. I think in terms of formal learning, scaled agile, as we're rolling it out, we've got to be across that. But I guess the cheekier answer from me would be I had to write a section of the Chief People Officer report for the board last week, which is something I haven't done before. So throwing that in and getting the red pen taken to it, that's probably the biggest learning that I've had in the last couple of weeks.
That's a great example. Thank you.
I'll ask one more question from online, although there are quite a few more, and apologies to everyone if we haven't got to your question. And then I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes left. So one of the questions was, how have you adapted training your frontline or your call centre staff that may have faced some challenges with customers over these last few years?
A bit of an answer to that. It'd be a bit hazy on the details because it's an example of a rogue team doing some fantastic work, I think, in our business. So insurance company, COVID, going through fires and things, something, we did okay actually as an organisation, because if cars aren't on the road, then they're not having accidents. So something that we did was we had initiatives where we sent all of our policyholders gift cards, so sent them a $50 preloaded piece. But we also opened up our internal assistance program, or EAP, to all of our customers, all of our brokers, and made that available to everyone that was calling up. So what that meant was those call centre staff that are facing some difficult calls. People out there were really, really struggling, and insurance is seen as an opportunity at times. So you would have those really challenging phone calls. So we gave them the opportunity to redirect those into professional help where needed. And I think that gave our call centre employees a really good opportunity to redirect the conversation. We also did a lot of training with them about how to deal with those challenging conversations, how to recognise mental illness, etc. So I think that was all stood up very, very quickly as we went into the pandemic, and we made it all available quite quickly. So pretty proud of that.
That's a great example. Okay, so as we start to wrap things up, anything that you haven't said that you'd like to say, final comments, advice, suggestions, recommendations, food for thought for everyone listening?
I just think for us, we've really tried to live what we're actually asking our learners to do, which is we've learnt while they've learnt. And I think for us, that's, I guess it's sort of, we've shown some vulnerabilities with our participants because we are learning as well, but it's actually given us credibility in the fact that we're trying just as hard as they are to work out like what this new normal is and what hybrid working is and how that actually plays out in our lives and our work. So I just think, sometimes we have to take a risk and we have to experiment a bit, and I'd encourage people to do that and give it a go.
Wonderful words. Thank you. Mary-Kay, what would you say in conclusion?
Oh, look, I think learning and development, in my experience, it's home for me. It's always had this unique ability to kind of connect the dots in an organisation, because you see so much of what's going on, and sometimes the rogues don't know what each other is doing, So I think we've got to really lean on our the way we work as connectors in the organisation and see that as a strength. And it actually, the second point I'd probably emphasise is We've been doing a lot of work in our team at the moment on our vision and purpose, so we're all clear on what we contribute to the organisation, but also on our strengths as a team. And my goodness, that's brought a new language for us. So connectedness is one of mine, and I realise why learning and development's my spirit home, you know? So just having that language within the team to go, what if we focus on what's right with you and with me and how we work together has been like a superpower through the last little while. So if you haven't checked out strengths, it's definitely worthwhile.
Thank you, thank you. Colin, final
I'd
words.
definitely echo the strengths comment. That's something that we've been doing, and it's been really effective as a team. And we're looking at how we push that out. I think in terms of things that I wish we'd all do, and I think it's similar to what Yvette was saying. Stop pursuing perfectionism. A 70% good enough piece of work is better than the 0% that might have existed beforehand. So get things out there, learn, iterate, learn from the mistakes. Don't be afraid to make them, and just keep evolving it, because it is new world. It's a new way of working, and if I knew the answers to it all, I'd be charging Denise.
Lovely, thank you so much. And so thank you so much to everyone who has listened in. I hope that you gained as much as I did from some really fabulous insights and some great suggestions and ideas that I hope you'll be able to use and massage and adopt in your own organizations. And so from MCI Solutions, thank you 100 times over to our panelists. We do have some gifts, we'll give it to them afterwards. And thank you to everyone who's asked such great questions. Sorry to those who couldn't answer all of them, but we look forward to seeing you at another event. Thank you so much.